This is our strategic plan. This is the 5-year direction that the Board of Education has set us on. We've got our mission, our vision, and our values are on the next page. But we have 4 big directions that we've been set on. And the decisions we're making and the strategies we implement tie into those 4 directions. And that's become the language in our district. First direction is around truth and reconciliation and seeing the calls to action implemented in our schools, in our buildings, and within our organization. And I'm going to unpack that a little bit more as we go on. The second direction is equity of access. It's really important that we look at what we're doing in our buildings to ensure that there's equity for all. And equity is not the same as equal. What we do for one isn't what we do for everybody. And we need to be really, really aware of that. Focus on wellness. And when we talk about wellness, we talk about the physical, the mental wellness of everybody within our organization and the emotional wellness. And then, of course, learning. We are a school district and we focus on learning. And we are really prioritizing looking at what we're doing for our Indigenous learners, our children in youth and care, and our learners with diverse abilities and disabilities. And those are some subpopulations that we're really focusing on and trying to build strategies around. These are our values. And we've got 6 value statements. And of course, all those values are surrounded around our values of First Peoples Principles of Learning. And this is the work that we focus on. So when we come to a table and we come into a conversation, these are the values that we think about when we're making the decisions. We value community, transparency, integrity, respect, inclusion, and equity, all encompassing, as well as valuing our First Peoples Principles of Learning, which there is an overlap there. So the implementation plan, and we prioritize the calls to action 6 to 12 in education. And we know calls to action 62 through to 65 are education for reconciliation. And because we're doing a 2-year implementation plan as opposed to a 5-year, makes our goals really succinct and really focused. And we're going to keep revisiting these. And my goal today, when we're done having a conversation after I'm done talking, is that we actually have some things that we can change in our implementation plan. That's the purpose today, because we know more information now than we did last spring. So we've got 2 goals. One is to create a systems approach to ensure our staff and students know and understand the calls to action as they're implemented in our system. And it's important that we consider UNDRIP through this work as well. And we need to enhance trauma-informed and resilience approaches in our school. And we saw evidence of that when we had our keynote speaker on our Indigenous Day of Learning. That brought out a lot of trauma responses for our adults. And our adults had to regulate. And that just made us really think deeply about our kids. If we're experiencing that as adults, how are our kids experiencing things in our schools? We have some strategies there, increase our elders and knowledge holders in our schools to support and mentor our staff with this work, review our curriculum. We really need to look at our curriculum and indigenize with local content. And decolonize to allow academics to be taught through a culture responsive lens. And that's some work that we're beginning to do. We're looking at our structures. We're looking at what we do to decolonize what's happening. Provide professional learning to our staff in truth and reconciliation and trauma-informed practices. Wednesdays, we've got lots of professional learning opportunities happening in our district. We are working on developing an education council. First Nation leaders, elders, K-12 leaders, and that's in conversations right now. We've started that work. More to come. This is really a council that needs to be developed with voice and input from everybody involved in that. And we are really looking at systematically onboarding our staff. So, how do we measure if what we're doing to decolonize, indigenize, talk about truth and reconciliation, be really explicit? How do we measure that? Right now, we don't have a lot of data to help us do that. What we had at the time was our student learning survey, where we asked the kids if they're learning about First Peoples in school. And you can see the data there. Less than 50% of our kids acknowledge that, which is a question for me. If we know our curriculum says that we need to do this, what's happening in our schools? Equity of access. Our goals, a continuum of support throughout the district to ensure all students have access to personalized learning. We talked about personalized learning a lot, but where's the evidence that that's happening? What is good for one isn't for all. It's not equal, it's equitable. Enhance our learning environments to build diverse supports for students to feel connected, engaged, and safe to take learning risks. If we're putting those proper supports in for equity, we should have environments that do this. And I don't want to read everything out today because we're limited with our time. You can see the strategies there. What's our very first strategy? Increase our communication with students and families while developing these learning supports. We need to clarify and communicate our processes for addressing racism and discrimination within our system. We need to look at our curriculum. We need to provide professional learning. We need to focus on our Wednesdays. We need to identify systems and structures that are not equitable. We need to continue to develop our district learner support. And then we are also looking at alternatives, and we're focusing on our alternate to suspension YMCA project. And those are some strategies. So if we know we're creating equity for our kids to be successful, we should see an increase in our graduation rates. So let's look at our graduation rates. So our 5-year Dogwood certificates. 76% of all students receive a Dogwood in 5 years. 55% of our Indigenous learners. That's a 21% gap. When we move to our students living on reserve, it becomes more grim. When we look at our children with diverse abilities and children in youth and care, we have some work to do. We are also looking at our transition of our students. What's happening to the kids that aren't there? Where did they go? And do you want your child to be one of the ones that doesn't go to the next grade? When we talk about the wellness of our students in our schools and how they're feeling, they have told us. They've essentially told us they don't feel like they belong, and 30% plus don't feel safe. And 30% plus don't believe 2 or more people care about them. We need to create a systems approach to supporting equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging. We need to enhance our mental health literacies, understanding, and its implementation. Continue to work with our educational researchers on curriculum, develop towards implementation of a new course on identity at the grade 8 level. Again, really focusing on our belonging here. And I'm not going to read them all. You can see them, but let's talk about our measures down here. We want to see an increase of 10% minimum. So we've got 3 goals for learning. And of course, numeracy and literacy and graduation rates to close the gap for our Indigenous learners, our children in youth and care, and our children with diverse abilities and disabilities. We need to create a system where all students develop a graduation success plan before transitioning to secondary school to help guide them towards their goals. Community told us we wait too long. We need to start working with our kids earlier on and helping them believe. And I told the story of the grade 2 student at CNC who had already decided as an 8-year-old that they don't have what it takes to go to post-secondary. And we need to enhance the district's academic learning opportunities connected to people, the place, and the land, and really looking at how we can do that to support learning. So you can see we have a plethora of strategies for learning. But you can see our data. We're using our FSAs. It's only one measure. We are adding additional measures in the area of reading, writing, and numeracy at the district level. But for right now, this is what we have. That's where we were for right now. So we know who our kids are. This includes our adult learners, and that's why you see the bump at grade 12. Here's our enrollment data. So you can see at our 903 kindergartens, 221 self-identify as Indigenous, and 682 don't. When I look at our students who have identified with a special education designation with exceptionalities, when we talk about our students, and we know that approximately 30% of our learners self-identify as Indigenous, when you look at what's happening with our special ed population, you would expect to see it not almost on par with our non-Indigenous. And then I looked at our enrollment beside it. There's 2 blue lines and 2 gray lines. And you'll see The second blue line is students who have a special ed designation. So the gap is much smaller there. If we know that only 30% of our kids are Indigenous, yet the special ed designations don't reflect that. A little bit more interesting enrollment data. You can see our all programs, our amount of kids in schools has increased by 243, but I find the bottom data quite interesting. We've got 834 students registered in Strong Start. 102 self-identify. So we're not quite at the 30% there. So how do we work together to support our kids? You can see our French immersion, and you can see our FEPANG international students are 3. So let's talk about our data. We have really high participation rates in School District 57, 20% higher than the provincial average. So we had 85% of our grade 4s participate in the FSAs for reading and 86.8% of our grade 7s. So our FSAs from last year, we have some theories about this. This is the cohort of kids who started with our interventions as kindergartens. This is the group. When we decided reading needs to be a focus here in School District 57, let's change how we're doing intervention. We changed our interventions. We became very explicit and purposeful in that. And look what happened. Our Indigenous students' reading is above the provincial average. It's actually 72.3. The province is 72. If you look at our grade 7s, bit of a different story there. But my question is, what did we do there? And how do we replicate it for our grade 7s? If our theory is that intervention worked, we need to think about that. Here's our writing. Look at our grade 4s again. And here's our numeracy. If you look at our numeracy again, we become more purposeful with our interventions at the primary grades. How do we replicate that? Student learning survey. I wish this told a different story. 32% of our kids still don't feel safe. 39% of our kids don't believe 2 or more adults care about them. 42%, 38% of our students feel like they belong. 61% of our kids feel welcome. 40% of our kids don't feel welcome when they come to school. So, next stats. Every school is doing a school plan. It's on their websites, focused on the 4 directions, and annual reports are being done for every school, and our departments have all done plans as well. We are looking at our operational plans and how it aligns to our directions. And then every year, the strategic plan and implementation plan will be reviewed. And it's through engagement. We're going to look at our strategy effectiveness. We're going to look at our data. We're going to make adjustments. And we're going to implement the adjusted plans. So we're here today to talk about some adjustments that need to be made. And this is all the opportunities we're going to have to make those adjustments and do this work. So next, by November, we should have our tentative raw data for our FSAs. And we can start looking at some of that work beginning. In January, we're going to do a progress to date, and we're going to hold another community group to do a progress to date. In March and April, that's where we look at our budgeting to ensure that how we're budgeting aligns to the work we need to do. In May, we're going to look again at the data we have and make adjustments for the following school year. And then in June, the budget and the implementation framework report and school reports will all be published for everybody to read how it goes. And that is my update of information.